He knocked on my door in the dead of night with the rain coming down in sheets. He did not say hello. He just looked at me with cold, terrified eyes and whispered to bring her upstairs, warning me to use no lights and make absolutely no noise. To keep my little girl safe from the men who thought they owned us, I ended up executing a trap so devastating it wiped an entire family empire off the map. My daughter is safe, but the sheer calculated destruction I orchestrated that night is something I will never forget. My name is Claire. I am 32 years old, and I work as a senior compliance auditor for a national financial firm based in Connecticut. I spend my days tracing complex audit trails, tracking hidden digital footprints, and catching corporate wire fraud. I understand exactly how money moves, how systems are manipulated, and exactly how people lie. I read dense financial spreadsheets the way other people read novels, looking for the gaps, the missing numbers, the quiet inconsistencies that always tell the real story. In my line of work, you learn very quickly that the loudest men in the room are usually the ones hiding the biggest secrets. You also learn that arrogance always leaves a paper trail. People with power get sloppy. They think because they have influence, they do not have to be careful. It was a Tuesday, 12 o'clock exactly. The rain was hitting the roof of my house so hard, it sounded like heavy gravel dropping from the pitch-black sky. Then came the knock. 3 sharp, urgent raps against the heavy wood of my front door. I froze. I was sitting at my kitchen island with a cup of tea going over a vendor contract. I walked to the door and opened it just a crack, keeping the heavy metal security chain engaged. Harrison stood there. He is 70 years old, a retired federal appellate judge, and my next-door neighbor. He was soaking wet. Water dripped heavily from the brim of his dark coat, pooling on the wood of my porch. He did not greet me. He just leaned in close to the narrow gap in the door and whispered the words that changed the trajectory of my entire life. Bring her up. No lights, no noise. I did not ask questions. You do not ask questions when a retired federal judge stands in the freezing rain at midnight and tells you to move. I unlatched the chain. I ran straight to the hallway bedroom. I grabbed my 6-year-old daughter Sarah from her mattress. I wrapped her tightly in a heavy quilted blanket. She was fast asleep, her breathing soft and rhythmic against my collarbone. I stepped out the back door and crossed the wet lawn between our houses. The cold mud soaked right through my slippers. The freezing rain plastered my hair to my face and neck. I held my child tight to my chest and climbed the dark wooden stairs to Harrison's second-floor study. The room smelled like old leather-aged paper and pipe tobacco. It was completely dark except for the far corner where 4 high-end security monitors glowed with a pale, unforgiving blue light. Harrison closed the heavy oak door behind us with a soft click. He pointed to the glowing screens. "Look," he commanded quietly. I looked at the largest monitor. It showed a crystal-clear, high-definition infrared feed of my own front porch. I saw a man in a dark waterproof jacket standing out of the rain. He lifted his bare hand to my security panel. He did not pick the lock. He did not force the heavy door with a tool. He simply punched in a 6-digit master override code. The green light on the panel flashed instantly. The heavy front door clicked open. The man stepped inside my living room, shook off the wet jacket, and pulled back his hood. It was Nathan, my ex-husband. My stomach dropped out from under me, but my heart rate stayed completely flat. Nathan is the heir to a massively wealthy Connecticut real estate and private security empire. His family owns the regional security company that installed my home system. It was the exact security system I paid for to keep him out. He was not breaking in. He was walking into my home like he still held the deed to the property. Our divorce was finalized 6 months ago. It was quiet on the legal documents, but an absolute war behind closed doors. Nathan's father, Richard, runs their family like a ruthless corporate syndicate. He demands absolute loyalty and punishes independence with total financial ruin. Richard made it exceptionally clear during the divorce proceedings that they would never let me walk away with Sarah. To Richard, Sarah is not just a little girl. She is the bloodline. She is a legacy asset that belongs exclusively on their family balance sheet. They tried to outspend me in family court. They hired 3 separate aggressive litigation firms to bury me in discovery motions. When that failed, they agreed to a 50-50 shared custody split. I should have known it was entirely too easy. I should have known Richard never accepts a compromise. Before I show you the devastating trap I laid for the men who thought they could take my child. Welcome back to the channel. Drop a comment with your city and local time. It helps more than you know. And if you believe family should never be used as a weapon to control you, hit subscribe. Your support means everything. I sat in the dark of Harrison's study, holding my sleeping daughter. I watched Nathan walk through my living room on the high-definition screen. He moved with a terrifying, unhurried casualness that made my skin crawl. He paused by the hallway console table. He picked up a framed photograph of Sarah and me, looked at it for a long second, and deliberately placed it face down on the wood. Every single step he took was a profound violation of my peace. I felt the freezing cold from my wet shoes creeping up my legs. I tightened my physical grip on the quilt wrapped around my daughter, promising myself I would not let them win. Harrison stood beside me with his arms crossed over his chest. He had seen this specific kind of arrogance before. In his decades on the federal bench, he had witnessed every shade of human greed and corruption. He knew exactly what a wealthy man looked like when he believed he was entirely above the consequence of the law. Nathan walked past the kitchen. He did not go toward the jewelry box in my bedroom. He did not look for cash or valuables in the living room drawers. He went straight into my home office. I leaned closer to the monitor, my breath catching in my throat. He pulled my desk chair out and sat down in front of my computer monitor. He reached into his pocket and took out a small silver flash drive. He reached behind the wooden desk and plugged it directly into the back of my primary network router. He was not there to steal my belongings. He was injecting something deeply malicious into my local network. The house was not a sanctuary at all. It was a glass box, and they had been watching me the entire time. A physical break-in is a crime of sudden opportunity. What Nathan was doing in my office was a crime of deep methodical calculation. He was building a narrative from the ground up, manipulating the digital foundation of my life. Any normal person would have panicked in that exact moment. Any normal person would have grabbed Harrison's desk phone, dialed the police, and screamed for them to send a patrol car with sirens blaring. I am not a normal person. I did not scream. I did not cry. Calling the local police in my town is a guaranteed dead end. Nathan's uncle is the precinct captain. If a patrol car showed up at my house with flashing lights, Nathan would simply tell the responding officers he was checking on a triggered alarm system because his family company monitors the property. The silver flash drive would disappear into his coat pocket in an instant. I would look like a hysterical, deeply paranoid ex-wife, making wild, baseless accusations in the middle of the night. I needed irrefutable proof. I needed the kind of concrete evidence that stands up in a federal court, not a county precinct where the local uniforms play softball with my former father-in-law. The kind of evidence that cannot be swept under the rug at a weekend country club dinner. My mind shifted gears instantly. The fear evaporated, replaced entirely by the cold, calculating focus I use when I find a massive discrepancy in a corporate audit. I became the auditor. My home was the crime scene, and Nathan was the target. I shifted Sarah's weight to my left arm, making sure she stayed asleep against my chest. With my right hand, I pulled my phone from my pocket. I bypassed my standard applications and logged directly into my personal secure cloud server. It is an encrypted server I built myself entirely isolated from the compromised home network the family security company installed. I opened my network diagnostic tools. I began to silently monitor the incoming traffic on my router from my remote connection. I watched the data packets routing through my network in real time. Lines of raw code scrolled rapidly down my phone screen. Nathan was not a technical genius. He had clearly hired someone expensive to build an automated injection script, and he was just sitting in my chair executing it. But an automated script always leaves digital breadcrumbs, and I catch digital breadcrumbs for a living. I traced the specific file directory he was creating on my network drive. He was dumping gigabytes of data straight onto my local hard drive, masking the origin points to make it look like local activity generated from my own keyboard. I pulled a quick randomized sample of the incoming packets and decrypted the metadata. My blood turned to absolute ice. They were emails. Dozens of forged emails sent from my personal account address to shady, unregulated pharmaceutical suppliers. Following the emails were fabricated internet searches, perfectly time-stamped to look like I had made them at 2 in the morning over the past 3 weeks. There were searches for highly illegal substances. There were searches for long-term inpatient psychiatric facilities. There were searches for how to legally surrender parental rights anonymously without family notification. I sat in the dark study and looked at the soft, innocent face of my little girl. The reality of the situation locked into place like the heavy door of a steel vault. This was not about scaring me. This was a high-stakes legal setup intentionally designed to destroy my life and sever my rights as a mother completely. They were going to raid my house with a court order. They were going to seize my personal computer. They were going to use these fabricated searches to drag me into family court on an emergency hearing. Richard was going to stand before a judge he played golf with, wave these fake emails in the air, and declare me an unfit, highly unstable mother who posed an immediate danger to her own child. They were going to take Sarah away from me legally, cleanly, and permanently. They were building a meticulous paper trail of madness. I could already see the courtroom playing out in my mind. I could see the sympathetic, practiced look on Richard's face as he told the judge his former daughter-in-law had lost her grip on reality. I could see Nathan playing the deeply concerned father, stepping up to save his child from a deranged mother. I was supposed to be the crazy woman who could not defend herself against the damning reality of her own internet search history. The legal trap was brilliant. On the monitor, I watched Nathan reach behind my desk and pull the silver flash drive out of the router. He stood up, pushed the chair back in perfectly so nothing looked disturbed, and walked out the front door. He locked it behind him using his master override code. He stepped back out into the pouring rain, pulling his hood up over his head. He thought he had just won the war. He believed he had executed a flawless, untraceable plan to steal my daughter. He did not know he had just handed the most meticulous compliance auditor in the state the exact digital weapon she needed to destroy his entire family. The sky turned a bruised, pale gray, just as the storm finally broke into a thin drizzle. I carried Sarah back across the saturated lawn at 5 in the morning. I slipped her beneath her heavy cotton duvet so carefully that her breathing never even hitched. By 6 o'clock, my kitchen looked exactly the way it did every other Wednesday. The coffee maker hissed and sputtered on the granite counter. The cast iron pan was warming on the front burner. I cracked 3 eggs into a glass bowl and began whisking. The rhythmic sound of the metal fork hitting the glass matched the steady, calculated pulse in my chest. I needed the house to smell like an ordinary morning. I needed the atmosphere to reflect a boring, predictable routine. The sweet buttermilk batter hit the hot skillet with a sharp sizzle, sending up a rich cloud of steam. But as I walked down the central hallway to check the thermostat, a completely different ribbon of air caught the back of my throat. It was faint, but entirely unmistakable. Beneath the heavy, comforting aroma of vanilla and butter lay the sharp cedar and bergamot notes of expensive designer cologne. Nathan's cologne. The scent was still trapped in the dead, stagnant air right outside my office door. My skin went completely cold, but I did not stop walking. I simply adjusted the temperature gauge and returned to the kitchen. 10 minutes later, Sarah was sitting at the breakfast bar swinging her small legs and happily drowning her pancakes in dark maple syrup. The overwhelming sugar smoke finally began to choke out the lingering physical evidence of her father's midnight intrusion. Then I heard the sound. The heavy, unmistakable crunch of premium tires rolling over the crushed white gravel of my driveway. I glanced through those kitchen blinds. A pristine white luxury SUV had parked directly behind my modest sedan. The driver's side door swung open and Audrey stepped out. She was holding a designer cardboard drink carrier from the overpriced organic market downtown. Audrey is Nathan's older sister. She is my former sister-in-law. She did not wait for me to answer the doorbell. She used her spare key, the one she swore she kept exclusively for absolute emergencies, and let herself into the entryway with a bright, painfully performative cheer. "Claire, sweetie. I was just in the neighborhood and thought you could use a proper morning pick-me-up," Audrey announced. Her voice dripped with that stylized suburban warmth that always made me feel like I was being handled by a crisis management firm. She walked straight into my kitchen, setting 2 oversized oat milk lattes on the counter. Her eyes immediately began to scan the room. It was not a casual glance. It was a sharp clinical diagnostic sweep. Her gaze flicked from the sticky syrup bottle to the overflowing trash can. then lingered heavily on the hallway leading back toward my private home office. "You look absolutely exhausted," Claire Audrey murmured. Her eyes settled on the faint dark shadows beneath my lower eyelids. I had intentionally skipped my morning concealer to give her exactly what she came to see. "Is everything okay over here? Nathan mentioned you seemed incredibly stressed during the custody call on Monday. He is so incredibly worried about your state of mind lately." I let my fingers find the silver watch on my left wrist. I spun the metal face around nervously, perfectly mimicking the exact body language of a woman who was slowly unraveling under the crushing pressure of single motherhood. "It has just been a lot to carry entirely on my own, Audrey," I said. I kept my pitch slightly tight. I let a false, fragile tremor touch the very edge of my voice. "The house feels so massive at night, and I swear I keep hearing strange things in the dark. I have not been sleeping more than 3 or 4 hours a night." Audrey's face softened, but it was not the softness of genuine human empathy. It was the predatory satisfaction of a hunter watching a target walk right into a snare. I saw her eyes dart back toward the hallway door again, checking to see if it was locked, verifying the environment for the digital trap her brother had just laid. She stepped deeper into the house, casually trailing her perfectly manicured hand along the doorframe as she walked toward my desk area. "You really should not push yourself so hard, Claire. Mental fatigue does terrible things to a person's judgment. If things are getting unstable, you need to tell us. We only want what is absolutely best for Sarah." She glanced down at my open purse on the counter. Her eyes were actively searching for any sign of prescription bottles or the manufactured chaos Nathan had planted hours before. I played my role flawlessly. I dropped a spatula on the floor. I let my hands shake just a fraction of an inch as I wiped the counter. I fed the beast exactly the nervous energy it needed to report back to the family patriarch. Let them think I was breaking. An auditor never interrupts a suspect while they are busy incriminating themselves. The air inside the private dining room at the Oak Ridge Country Club was thick with the scent of roasted prime rib, polished mahogany, and unearned authority. It was Thursday night. This was the mandatory custody transition dinner that Richard insisted on hosting every single month to maintain the public illusion of flawless family harmony. I sat at the far end of a table large enough to seat 20 people entirely isolated in my high-backed leather chair. Richard sat at the head of the table cutting his steak with slow, terrifying precision. Nathan was to his right, wearing a tailored navy blazer, his posture smug and relaxed as he swirled a glass of expensive bourbon. Audrey sat directly across from me, sipping her vintage red wine, her diagnostic eyes still monitoring my every move. No one had asked about Sarah's school week. No one had asked how my consulting work was going. The entire dinner was a calculated exercise in corporate intimidation disguised as a friendly family meal. Richard set his heavy silver fork down against the fine china. The sharp clink echoed off the high wood-paneled walls. "Claire," he began. His low baritone voice carried the absolute weight of his millions. "We need to have a serious adult conversation about your future. And more importantly, about Sarah's stability." I kept my hands folded tightly in my lap, hidden beneath the white linen napkin. I looked at him and said absolutely nothing, letting the uncomfortable silence stretch between us. "My sources tell me your financial compliance firm is facing some serious cash flow constraints this quarter," Richard continued. He leaned forward, resting his heavy forearms on the table. "And Audrey tells me you looked completely unhinged yesterday morning. Trembling hands, paranoia about noises in the night. Nathan is losing sleep over this. We cannot have our granddaughter raised in an environment characterized by severe mental instability and imminent financial ruin. It is just temporary stress," I lied. I pitched my voice to sound defensive, fragile, and desperate. "I am managing everything perfectly fine." "You are not managing," Nathan cut in. A cruel, mocking smile touched his mouth. "You are drowning, Claire. You have always been completely out of your depth without my family infrastructure supporting you. You do not have the internal capacity for this." Richard lifted his hand, silencing his son with a single sharp gesture. "I am a reasonable man, Claire," the patriarch said. His eyes drilled into mine with absolute terrifying certainty. "I have deep personal relationships with every single family court judge in this county. We play golf together every Saturday morning at this very club. they trust my judgment explicitly. If we take this custody battle to trial on Monday morning, it will not be a negotiation. We will present our documented evidence of your unstable behavior, your erratic searches, and your financial collapse. Your name will be dragged through the absolute mud in the local papers. You will lose primary custody, and you will receive supervised visitation at best. He paused, letting the threat settle in the heavy air of the room like poison. However, I am willing to offer you a way out, Richard murmured. He did not blink. Sign over full primary custody to Nathan voluntarily tonight. We will bury the evidence of your breakdown. We will let you keep standard weekend visitation, and we will ensure you stay financially afloat. If you refuse, we will take her by force on Monday morning, and you will be left with absolutely nothing. The fluorescent lights of my downtown office buzzed with a low mechanical hum that matched the cold clarity settling into my chest. It was Friday morning, 9 o'clock exactly. I sat at my dual monitor desk, the heavy leather chair pushed close, completely insulated from the rest of the building. Richard genuinely believed his threat at the country club had broken my spirit. He believed I was sitting at home weeping, staring at the wall in absolute despair. He had no idea that a senior compliance auditor does not panic when the numbers look bad. An auditor simply expands the scope of the investigation. I pulled up my secure financial compliance portal. As a senior officer for a national firm, I have legal authorized access to cross-border transaction tracking systems and corporate disclosure registries used to screen for institutional money laundering. I was not breaking the law. I was simply running a standard risk assessment on Richard's primary commercial real estate entities. I wanted to see exactly how a man who claimed to have everything was actually funding his intimidation campaigns. My fingers flew across the keyboard, typing in the tax identification numbers for his various shell corporations. I ran a deep forensic sweep on his recent outgoing wire transfers, over $30,000. Line after line of clean corporate data flashed on my screen. Real estate acquisitions, concrete suppliers, standard operating expenses. Then a specific transaction from 3 weeks ago flagged my compliance filter. It was a $45,000 payment, routed from a secondary consulting account directly to a private medical company based out of New Jersey. The entity was registered under the name of Dr. Julian Hayes. I opened a second browser window and pulled the Public State Medical Board Registry for New Jersey. Julian Hayes was a licensed psychiatrist, but when I clicked on his disciplinary history, the real ledger revealed itself. Hayes had been heavily sanctioned 2 years ago for falsifying medical records in a massive corporate insurance fraud case. He was a disgraced mercenary with a medical license, a man who sold clinical opinions to the highest bidder. I went back to my financial portal and pulled the underlying bank wire attachments for that $45,000 transfer. Bound to the digital receipt was an encrypted document reference link. I used my internal compliance security tokens to view the file description. It was an invoice. The memo line contained 2 words and a case number: Claire Evaluation. The family had not just planted digital evidence on my home router. They had literally purchased a backdated, completely fabricated psychiatric diagnosis from a corrupt out-of-state doctor. They had bought medical perjury to perfectly match the fake search history Nathan had injected into my hard drive. The trap was not just closing, it was completely locked. By Monday morning, they would have a signed clinical affidavit stating I was a profound danger to my child, backed up by fake internet data that the local police captain would gladly validate. A cold, diamond-hard fury settled behind my ribs. I closed the compliance portal, turned off my dual monitors, and sat in the total silence of my office. They had completely rigged the local legal system against me. I could not outmaneuver them in a county court, where the rules were written over 18 holes of golf. To save my daughter from the monsters who thought they owned her, I was going to have to make a move so desperate, so unforgivable, it would change everything. The crisp autumn air bit through my light coat as I stood at the far edge of the elementary school parking lot. The final dismissal bell had just rung, sending a flood of children tumbling out of the heavy double doors. Yellow school buses idled in a long, noisy line, their diesel exhaust mixing with the scent of crushed dry leaves. Most parents crowded near the main walkway, eager to catch their kids. I deliberately parked near the distant fence line to avoid the crushing traffic and the forced small talk. I kept my car keys loosely in my right hand, watching the colorful backpacks bob through the crowd. That was when a shadow detached itself from the side of a massive black SUV, idling 3 spaces away. It was Richard. He was wearing a meticulously tailored charcoal suit that undoubtedly cost more than my entire professional wardrobe. He did not look like an affectionate grandfather waiting patiently to pick up his grandchild on a Friday afternoon. He looked exactly like a corporate raider arriving to execute a hostile takeover. I stopped 10 feet away from my vehicle. I did not smile, and I absolutely did not flinch. Richard walked toward me with the slow, measured pace of a man who firmly believed he controlled the very oxygen in the atmosphere. He reached inside his jacket pocket and pulled out a thick manila envelope. He held it out to me. I did not raise my hand to take it. Finding no compliance, he let it drop onto the hood of my sedan with a heavy, insulting slap. "That is a petition for an emergency custody modification," Richard stated. His voice was perfectly level, entirely stripped of any familial warmth. "It grants Nathan full, immediate physical and legal custody of Sarah. You will be granted supervised visitation for 2 hours every other Sunday, strictly pending a full psychological evaluation." I stared at the thick envelope resting on the cold metal of my car. My heart hit my ribs like a sledgehammer, but I kept my facial expression entirely blank. "On what grounds?" I asked quietly. Richard offered a tight, deeply patronizing smile. "On the grounds that you are actively seeking illegal narcotics and researching inpatient psychiatric facilities on your home computer. On the grounds that we have a sworn medical affidavit from a licensed physician detailing your profound mental collapse. I play golf with the family court judge who will hear this petition on Monday morning. He will sign it before he even finishes his breakfast." I let the silence hang heavily between us. I read his posture instantly. A man holding a guaranteed royal flush does not corner you in a crowded school parking lot on a Friday afternoon to discuss terms. He simply plays the winning hand in court. He was standing here in the cold wind because he desperately wanted to make a deal. As an auditor, I know exactly what it looks like when someone is hiding their true objective. "You did not come here just to take my daughter, Richard," I said. "You came here to trade her for something else entirely. Tell me what it is you actually want." His confident smile faded. The polished, untouchable veneer cracked just a fraction of an inch, revealing the desperate greed clawing underneath. My grandfather had passed away 2 years ago. He was a quiet, intensely practical man who saved every penny he ever earned. In his will, he left me 40 acres of undeveloped commercial land situated perfectly near a major highway intersection in Fairfield County. To anyone else, it was just a massive stretch of old trees and dirt. To an aggressive real estate developer, it was a literal gold mine. Richard took a step closer, closing the distance between us. His expensive leather shoes crunched sharply on the loose gravel. "My firm has a massive commercial plaza project slated for next year. We are expanding rapidly. We need that specific land to anchor the new development. Sign over the deed to the 40 acres to my holding company today. If you comply, the psychiatric evaluation goes straight into the shredder. The fake search history disappears completely. You keep your standard custody arrangement. Sarah stays with you tonight." The sheer breathtaking audacity of the offer made the blood roar in my ears. He was not just attempting to steal my child. He was holding my little girl hostage to extort my family inheritance. I looked directly into his eyes and finally saw the raw truth. His company was not expanding. His company was drowning. A powerful developer does not resort to buying medical perjury to steal undeveloped woodland unless they are completely overleveraged. His creditors were undoubtedly calling in their notes. He was bleeding cash, and he desperately needed the unencumbered value of my land to secure a new bridge loan to save his empire from total bankruptcy. He thought he had found the ultimate leverage. I glanced toward the school entrance. I could see Sarah's bright pink backpack bobbing joyfully through the crowd of exiting children. My chest ached with a terrifying primal need to scoop her up and run as far away as possible. But running would only delay the inevitable destruction. If I refused his demand right now, he would file the forged papers on Monday. I would spend years navigating a rigged court system fighting simply to see my own daughter. I had to buy crucial time. I had to let him firmly believe he had won the war. Have your corporate lawyers draw up the quitclaim deed, I said. My voice sounded hollow, defeated, exactly the way he needed it to sound. I will meet you at your office in 1 hour. Richard adjusted his French cuffs, immensely satisfied. A highly logical choice, Claire. We are a family after all. We always look out for our own. He turned his back on me and walked to his waiting vehicle. An hour later, I stepped out of a silent elevator onto the top floor of Richard's corporate headquarters. The reception area was an intimidating, sterile expanse of white marble and frosted glass. I was escorted immediately into his private corner office. The massive room smelled like expensive espresso and sharp leather polish. Nathan was already sitting there, slouched casually on a suede sofa, radiating unearned triumph. Richard sat confidently behind an enormous mahogany desk. A young female notary stood nervously near the window. The quitclaim deed rested in the exact center of the polished wood desk. Next to it lay a heavy, ornate brass pen. I walked slowly to the desk. Every single step felt like I was wading through deep, freezing water. This land was the only tangible thing my grandfather had left to me. He used to walk those 40 acres with me when I was a little girl, pointing out the ancient oak trees, telling me that land was the only thing in the world that truly lasted. Handing it over to these corrupt, arrogant men felt like a physical betrayal that threatened to crush my lungs. The guilt settled heavily on my shoulders. I felt physically sick to my stomach. Nathan leaned forward on the sofa, resting his elbows on his knees. It really is for the best, Claire. You do not know the first thing about commercial property management anyway. You are doing the right thing for Sarah. He desperately wanted me to cry. He was waiting for the tears to fall, waiting for the dramatic breakdown that would validate his entire cruel worldview. I vehemently refused to give him a single drop of satisfaction. I kept my spine perfectly straight. I did not let my hands tremble. I picked up the heavy brass pen. The metal was icy against my fingers. I looked down at the signature line. I forced myself to think about my daughter waiting for me at home, coloring happily at the kitchen table, completely unaware of the monsters circling our lives. I signed my name. The black ink flowed dark and smooth across the legal paper. I handed the document directly to the notary. She stamped it loudly, signed her portion, and handed the completed deed to Richard. Richard smiled widely, carefully slipping the deed into a leather presentation folder. Thank you, Claire. The psychiatric evaluation has already been completely destroyed. You can pick Sarah up for your weekend as scheduled. Have a pleasant evening. I walked straight out of that glass office. I rode the elevator down to the main lobby in total suffocating silence. I walked out the sliding glass doors, got into my car, and shut the door. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned stark white. I let the crushing guilt and panic wash over me for exactly 10 seconds. Then I let it completely go. I reached into my bag, pulled out my keys, and started the engine. Richard and Nathan genuinely thought they had just broken my spirit. They thought they had successfully backed me into a corner and stolen my grandfather's legacy. They had absolutely no idea that I had just handed them a live grenade with the pin already pulled. My grandfather was a very cautious, incredibly brilliant man. He loved those woods deeply. He knew that ambitious developers would eventually try to pave over them. Decades ago, long before I was even born, he quietly placed a federal Environmental Protection Agency conservation easement on the entire 40-acre parcel. It was an ironclad, irrevocable federal protection permanently designating the land as a protected wetland sanctuary. He expertly buried this specific easement deep inside a blind trust. A standard local municipal title search would completely miss it. Only a deep, specialized federal property audit would reveal the severe restriction. If Richard tried to move a single piece of heavy machinery onto that land, if his crew dug one single shovel of dirt to build his commercial plaza, he would instantly trigger millions of dollars in immediate federal environmental fines. The EPA would halt all construction immediately. His corporate operating accounts would be frozen by federal regulators. The land he just extorted from me was commercially worthless. It was a deeply poisoned apple, and he had just taken a massive, eager bite. But the trap I was building went much deeper than just dirt. I drove straight back to my house. I walked into my home office, shut the door, and locked it. I fired up my computer and logged directly into the secure commercial lending database using my top-level compliance credentials. Richard had the signed deed now. He was going to use it immediately. Men drowning in massive debt do not wait to restructure their assets. I ran a targeted search on his primary corporate tax identification number. I watched the screen as the database updated the ledgers in real time. There it was. Richard had already submitted 3 separate commercial bridge loan applications to major out-of-state banks. He was actively pledging my grandfather's federally protected land as pristine, unencumbered commercial collateral to secure millions in raw cash. I sat back in my desk chair. A cold, absolute smile finally touched my face. Pledging restricted, commercially worthless land as high-value collateral to a federally insured bank is not a simple local zoning violation. It is a severe federal crime. It is multi-million-dollar bank fraud. And because he was sending these fraudulent applications to out-of-state banks using digital wire transfers, he was actively committing federal wire fraud. I spent the next 4 hours downloading absolutely everything. I pulled the specific loan application timestamps. I pulled the property transfer records showing the ink still drying. I pulled the original EPA conservation easement documents directly from the Federal Registry. I pulled the secure IP logs proving Nathan had breached my home network. I pulled the wire transfer receipts proving Richard had paid a disgraced New Jersey doctor for explicit medical perjury. I clicked print. The heavy laser printer in the corner of my office hummed to life. I listened to the rhythmic, deeply satisfying sound of crisp white paper sliding into the output tray. Page after page of undeniable airtight proof. I took a massive 3-ring leather binder from my supply closet. I hole-punched every single document. I separated them with neat categorized tabs. Bank fraud, wire fraud, medical perjury, cyber intrusion. I closed the heavy binder. It was 3 inches thick. It contained the complete systematic destruction of the entire Connecticut real estate empire. I turned off my desk lamp. The house was completely quiet. My daughter was safe asleep down the hall. I looked at the binder sitting in the center of my desk. Richard had given me an ultimatum. I was about to give him a federal indictment. The heavy storm had passed, leaving behind a deceptive and quiet weekend. The air outside was crisp, smelling faintly of damp pine and crushed autumn leaves. Richard and Nathan firmly believed they had completely broken me in that high-rise glass office. They had acquired my grandfather's land. They had forced my hand on the legal deed. To them, I was entirely neutralized. They viewed me as a defeated, compliant woman who would silently accept her weekend visitations and fade into the suburban background while they controlled my child. But financial predators are rarely satisfied with just one single victory. They always want to clear the entire board. Audrey showed up at my front door on Sunday afternoon. She was holding a chilled bottle of expensive French wine and wearing a perfectly tailored cashmere sweater. She offered a soft, apologetic smile that did not quite reach her cold eyes. She told me she just wanted to check in. She claimed the family felt terrible about how intense things had gotten with the custody papers. She called the wine a simple peace offering. I opened the door wide and welcomed her inside. I took her coat. I offered her a seat at the kitchen island. I poured her a glass of the very wine she brought. I played the role of a woman who was simply too exhausted to fight anymore. I let my shoulders slump. I spoke in a quiet, submissive tone. Audrey ate it up. She practically glowed with the toxic satisfaction of seeing me so completely diminished. Halfway through her second glass, Audrey asked to use the powder room. The guest bathroom is located down the main hallway, directly across from my home office. I smiled and told her to go ahead. The exact moment she turned the corner out of sight, I pulled my phone from my pocket. I did not need to guess what she was doing. I had spent the previous evening installing 3 untraceable micro cameras in the ceiling corners of my office. They were the size of a pinhead and completely invisible, unless you knew exactly where to look. I opened the live feed on my screen. Audrey did not go into the powder room. She stepped silently into my private office and pulled her phone from her pocket. I watched her perfectly manicured hands sorting through the mail I had intentionally left, stacked on the corner of my desk. She was snapping high-resolution photographs of my personal bank statements. She photographed my primary checking routing numbers. She photographed my corporate payroll deposit records. She photographed the balance sheet of my local savings account. A deep, terrifying chill settled into my bones. The real agenda became crystal clear. They did not just want my grandfather's land. They wanted to drain every single dollar to my name. They were going to weaponize my financial data to freeze my accounts or empty my reserves. If I had absolutely no money, I could never afford to hire a competent family law attorney to fight them when they inevitably broke their custody promises. They were systematically dismantling my ability to survive. I watched Audrey slip the papers back into a neat pile. She walked out of the office and flushed the toilet in the powder room to maintain her alibi. I slipped my phone back into my pocket and turned to greet her with a warm, defeated smile. Let her think she had won. As a senior compliance auditor, I understand exactly how financial predators operate. They are driven by an insatiable hunger for total control. When they spot a vulnerability, they do not hesitate. They strike. And I knew exactly how to use that blinding hunger against them. In the cybersecurity and financial fraud world, we use a tool called a honey trap. You create a digital mirage that looks incredibly valuable. Leave it slightly exposed and wait for the unauthorized user to take the bait. I needed Richard and Nathan to incriminate themselves so thoroughly that no local judge could ever save them. I needed absolute, undeniable federal charges. I spent Monday morning constructing the perfect illusion. I set up a secure dummy portal on a private server, designing it to look exactly like the interface of a high-wealth offshore banking institution based in the Cayman Islands. I fabricated an incredibly detailed financial ledger showing a hidden liquid balance of just over $3 million. I tied the fake portal to the exact routing numbers Audrey had photographed in my office. I printed a single physical account summary page and left it peeking out from beneath a stack of utility bills on my desk. I made sure the login credentials required a secondary authentication that would automatically log the Internet Protocol address, device serial number, and physical location of anyone attempting to access the vault. I knew Audrey would immediately take her photographs back to her father and brother. They would see the routing numbers and assume I was hiding massive offshore wealth from the divorce settlement. Their greed would override any sense of caution. They would want to drain that phantom account to ensure my complete ruin. All I had to do was sit back and wait for the trap to spring. The alert pinged my secure mobile device on Wednesday evening at exactly 8 o'clock. It was an unauthorized access attempt. I sat at my dining room table and opened my tracing software. The data packets flooded across my screen. Someone was aggressively trying to bypass the firewall on my fake offshore portal, using the stolen credentials Audrey had photographed. I initiated the tracking protocol. The incoming digital footprint did not bounce through an anonymous proxy server. They were entirely too arrogant to even cover their tracks. The ping originated directly from the static network address registered to the executive suite of Richard's corporate headquarters. I watched the keystrokes register in real time. They were entering my personal identification numbers. They were trying to authorize a massive wire transfer to pull the fabricated $3 million into a blind holding account. I took a slow sip of my black coffee. A profound sense of cold satisfaction washed over me. By actively using stolen credentials to attempt an unauthorized financial transfer across state and international lines, Richard and Nathan were no longer just bullies in a family court dispute. They were actively committing documented federal wire fraud. Each click of their mouse was a separate felony count carrying a penalty of up to 20 years in federal prison. I systematically logged every single keystroke. I saved the timestamps. I downloaded the localized server pings confirming the exact floor of the building they were sitting on. They thought they were quietly draining my life savings. Instead, they were meticulously wrapping a federal indictment around their own necks. I needed to ensure the evidence was utterly impenetrable. I ran a secondary trace to verify the exact device they were using. The internal network address confirmed it was Nathan's personal corporate laptop. I could picture the two of them sitting in Richard's mahogany-paneled office, pouring expensive scotch, congratulating themselves on outsmarting me. They probably believed they were striking the final fatal blow to my independence. They thought taking this hidden money would force me onto my knees, begging them for access to my own daughter. Every time the access denied prompt flashed on their end, they pushed harder. They tried forcing the password. They tried redirecting the wire transfer protocol. I captured every single aggressive maneuver. The sheer arrogance of their actions was breathtaking. They felt so immune to consequence that they did not even consider the possibility they were walking into a digital slaughterhouse. I compiled the logs encrypting the data into a locked file. The honey trap had performed flawlessly. With the federal wire fraud evidence securely captured, I had to completely insulate my actual life from the impending blast radius. I knew the moment I dropped the hammer, the family would unleash everything they had. I needed to become a ghost on paper. First thing Thursday morning, I executed a series of highly complex financial maneuvers. I quietly liquidated my genuine personal accounts and moved every single dollar of my actual savings into an airtight, irrevocable trust in Sarah's name. I structured the trust so that even if I were somehow incapacitated, Nathan and his family could never touch a single dime of it. I named a neutral corporate fiduciary as the trustee. I legally removed myself as the primary financial target. On paper, Claire had zero assets to seize. If they tried to sue me into oblivion, they would find nothing but an empty shell. That evening, under the cover of absolute darkness, I walked across the cold lawn to Harrison's house. The retired judge was waiting in his study, sitting quietly in his leather wingback chair. The room smelled faintly of old paper and wood smoke. I handed him a heavy encrypted hard drive and a physical binder containing the printed paper copies. It held the high-resolution videos of Audrey planting evidence and photographing my bank statements. It held the undeniable internet logs and timestamps of Nathan and Richard committing federal wire fraud. It held the banking records proving Richard had purchased medical perjury from a disgraced physician to falsify my psychiatric evaluation. Harrison adjusted his reading glasses and spent a long time reviewing the documents. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the sharp sound of turning pages. When he finally looked up, his eyes were sharp and grave. He did not smile. He simply nodded. He told me the documentation was flawless. It was a perfectly wrapped gift for any ambitious prosecutor. He informed me he would be taking a drive to the city the following morning to hand-deliver the entire package directly to a former colleague who currently served as the lead prosecutor for the United States Attorney's Office. The federal machinery was now officially in motion. The trap was locked. I returned home and found a heavy gold-embossed envelope waiting in my mailbox. It was an invitation printed on thick, expensive cardstock. The family was hosting a massive charity gala at the most exclusive luxury hotel in the county. The invitation proudly announced that Richard would be giving a keynote address to officially unveil his company's newest commercial development project, a project located on the exact 40 acres of federally protected wetland he had extorted from me. They had actually invited me. It was the ultimate display of dominance and cruelty. They wanted me to stand in the back of the room and watch them celebrate my complete submission. They wanted me to witness the total victory of their empire and know my place. I placed the invitation on my kitchen counter. I looked at the gold lettering catching the overhead light. I did not throw it away. I traced the raised print with my finger. I was absolutely going to attend. The Grand Hotel in downtown Hartford has a massive lobby that smells entirely of old money. It is a very specific, suffocating scent composed of industrial floor wax, imported white lilies, and the kind of heavy designer perfume that costs more than my first vehicle. I pulled my modest sedan up to the valet stand, stepped out into the crisp evening air, and handed my keys to a young man in a red uniform. The charity gala was being hosted in the main ballroom on the top floor. This was the undisputed crown jewel event of the season for the local corporate elite. The room was a vast, glittering sea of bespoke black tuxedos and trailing silk gowns. Enormous crystal chandeliers hung heavily from the vaulted ceiling, casting a warm, fractured light over 300 of the wealthiest investors, politicians and board members in the state. Waiters in pristine white coats moved silently through the dense crowd, carrying polished silver trays loaded with champagne flutes and miniature appetizers. The dull roar of polite, meaningless conversation bounced off the gold leaf walls. It was exactly the kind of room where terrible people gather to convince each other they are actually good, honorable citizens. I arrived exactly 45 minutes after the heavy brass doors opened. I did not wear sequins. I did not rent a flamboyant evening gown. I wore a simple, structured navy blue dress that fell just below my knees. It was the exact dress I wore when I successfully audited my first Fortune 500 company. In my right hand, I carried a sleek, incredibly heavy leather briefcase. Carrying a briefcase to a black tie gala is a very intentional statement. It breaks the unspoken visual rules of the room. It signals that you are not there to socialize or drink. You are there to work. And I was absolutely there to work. The contrast between my reality and their illusion was staggering. These people lived their entire lives insulated by wealth, believing that money could rewrite the laws of the universe. They believed they could buy a doctor to say I was crazy. They believed they could steal a child because their bank account was larger than mine. I walked past a group of men discussing offshore tax havens and golf handicaps. I did not engage. I walked slowly into the main ballroom. I let my eyes adjust to the glittering light. I scanned the room with the methodical, cold precision of a predator cataloging its environment. I spotted them almost immediately. They were holding court near a massive, melting ice sculpture carved into the shape of a soaring eagle. Richard was gripping a heavy glass of scotch, laughing loudly at something the local mayor had just said. Audrey was standing right beside him, wearing a silver dress that looked like liquid metal, nodding along with absolute performative grace. Then Nathan saw me. He was standing near the entrance to the roped-off VIP area, holding a half-empty champagne flute. I watched his eyes track over my dark navy dress. I watched his gaze drop down to the heavy leather briefcase, securely gripped in my hand. The smug, relaxed posture he had been carrying all evening instantly vanished. His shoulders went completely rigid. The color drained out of his face for exactly 1 second, before the sheer arrogant anger rushed back in to replace it. He shoved his glass onto a passing waiter's tray and marched straight toward me, weaving aggressively through the crowd of oblivious laughing donors. I did not stop walking. I kept my pace completely even until we met near the edge of the polished mahogany dance floor. Nathan stepped directly into my path, forcing me to halt. He used his height to try and physically intimidate me, looming over my personal space. He leaned down, bringing his face so close to mine that I could smell the sharp metallic tang of the gin on his breath. "What on earth are you doing here, Claire?" he hissed. His voice was a tight, controlled whisper, designed specifically to avoid drawing the attention of the surrounding guests. "You have absolutely no right to show your face in this room. You are completely out of your league." I looked at him. I did not step back. I just gripped the handle of my briefcase a fraction tighter. "I received an invitation in the mail." "Nathan," I replied calmly. My voice was perfectly flat. "IRSVPD, yes. It is basic etiquette to attend when formally invited." "Do not play games with me," he sneered, his eyes darting nervously toward his father across the massive room. "We only sent that invitation as a formality to rub it in. We expected you to be sitting at home crying into a bottle of cheap wine. You have absolutely zero power left in this family. We own the land. We have all the leverage. You are an unhinged woman standing in a room full of billionaires. You need to turn around, walk out those front doors, and go back to your pathetic little life before my father sees you and decides to ruin you even faster." I offered him a tiny, incredibly polite smile. "I am not going anywhere, Nathan. I would not miss your father's speech for the entire world." He glared at me with absolute unfiltered hatred. He thought I was just being stubborn. He thought I was holding on to some desperate, pathetic shred of pride. He had no idea he was standing in the direct path of an oncoming train. He stepped aside, shaking his head in disgust, and pointed toward the back of the room. "Stay entirely out of sight," he commanded. "If you make a scene, I swear I will have hotel security drag you out into the street." I walked past him without another word. I found a quiet spot near the heavy velvet drapes at the absolute back of the ballroom. I asked a waiter for a glass of sparkling water with a lime. I took a slow sip and settled in to watch the show. At exactly 8:30, the string quartet stopped playing. A low electronic hum signaled the main microphone being turned on at the front of the room. The crowd fell into a respectful, expectant silence. Richard walked up the carpeted steps to the grand stage. He moved with the heavy, undeniable gravity of a king surveying his loyal subjects. He adjusted the microphone stand, cleared his throat, and offered a wide, benevolent smile to the room. The harsh spotlight caught the expensive gold watch on his wrist, making it flash brilliantly across the dark walls. "Thank you all for being here tonight," Richard began, his voice booming effortlessly through the massive speakers. "We are here to celebrate charity, community, and the enduring, unbreakable strength of family legacy. For 4 decades, our company has built the very foundations of this great county. We have weathered brutal economic storms. We have provided thousands of jobs. We have shaped the very skyline you see outside these gorgeous windows. The crowd clapped politely. I took another slow sip of my sparkling water. The cold condensation from the glass dripped onto my fingers. I kept my eyes locked entirely on the man on the stage. But a true legacy is not just about standing still. Richard continued, his voice rising with practiced theatrical passion. A true legacy requires aggressive visionary expansion. It requires the bold courage to seize new opportunities and completely secure the financial future for the next generation. That is exactly why I am incredibly proud to announce tonight that we have officially acquired the highly coveted 40-acre site on the Northern Highway corridor. A much louder round of applause echoed through the ballroom. I watched several prominent local politicians nod in enthusiastic approval. Richard soaked in the adulation for a long moment before raising his hands to quiet the room. "This acquisition is a monumental milestone for our enterprise," he declared proudly, leaning into the microphone. "We are not just holding this land, we are putting it to work immediately. I am thrilled to share that we have successfully secured massive commercial backing from 3 of the largest national banks in the country. We have officially leveraged this pristine, prime real estate to fund the construction of our brand new state-of-the-art corporate headquarters. Groundbreaking will begin next month. We are taking this company into a completely new stratosphere of wealth and influence." I stood in the shadows at the back of the room and simply listened. I listened to a man standing on a lit stage, holding a live microphone, publicly confessing to multiple counts of federal bank fraud in front of 300 elite witnesses. He was openly boasting to his investors about securing massive national bank loans, using a piece of land that carried an irrevocable Federal Environmental Protection Agency conservation easement. He was bragging about pledging commercially worthless, federally protected wetland as pristine commercial collateral to out-of-state financial institutions. As a compliance auditor, I knew exactly what laws he was breaking. 18 United States Code Section 1344, bank fraud. I knew exactly how a commercial bridge loan worked. Banks require unencumbered assets. They require sworn statements that the collateral is free of any local, state, or federal restrictions. Richard had signed those documents. He had wired those fraudulent documents across state lines. The federal authorities treat wire fraud very simply. It is a strict liability game. When he mentioned the 3 national banks, I mentally checked off the jurisdictions. The FBI would not even need to build a complex case. Richard was handing them a perfectly packaged public confession. I watched the mayor clap him on the back. I watched local developers raise their glasses in a toast to a man who was, mathematically speaking, already a federal inmate. Every single word out of his mouth was another nail driven firmly into his own coffin. He was digging his grave deeper and deeper with every arrogant sentence, and the entire room of wealthy elites was clapping for him as he did it. The sheer blinding hubris of the man was almost beautiful to witness. He thought he was untouchable. He firmly believed his wealth and local connections made him completely immune to consequence. I watched his face shine under the bright stage lights. I kept my hand resting lightly on the handle of my heavy leather briefcase. The trap was no longer just set in private. The trap had just been broadcast to the entire county. The applause eventually died down, and the orchestra resumed playing a soft classical piece. The crowd began to drift back toward the open bars and the lavish buffet tables. I turned away from the stage and began walking slowly toward the exit. I had seen exactly what I needed to see. But before I could reach the heavy brass doors of the main lobby, a firm hand gripped my elbow. I turned around. It was Audrey. Her fingers dug sharply into my arm through the fabric of my navy dress. "My father would like a private word with you," she said. Her voice was completely devoid of the fake sweetness she had used in my kitchen just a few days prior. It was cold hard and entirely commanding. I let her guide me down a short carpeted hallway away from the main ballroom. She pushed open a heavy oak door and shoved me into a private VIP lounge. The room was soundproofed and smelled strongly of expensive cigars and spilled liquor. Richard and Nathan were already inside waiting for me. Richard was pouring himself a fresh glass of scotch from a crystal decanter on a side table. Nathan was leaning against the wall, his arms crossed over his chest. A look of profound, sickening satisfaction etched across his face. Audrey closed the heavy door behind us and locked it with a sharp, echoing click. I stood in the center of the room, holding my briefcase entirely surrounded by the three of them. "You actually had the nerve to show up here tonight," Richard said, taking a slow sip of his drink. He did not look angry anymore. He looked incredibly amused. "I suppose I should admire your sheer persistence, Claire. You signed over the land. You did exactly what you were told. You came here to watch me announce my victory. It is almost pathetic to witness. I promised you the land in exchange for maintaining my 50-50 custody arrangement," I said quietly, playing the exact role of the defeated mother he expected to see. I held up my end of the bargain, Richard. Richard laughed. It was a dark rumbling sound that filled the small room. Nathan chuckled from his position against the wall. Audrey simply smiled her cold diagnostic smile. "Did you honestly believe I was ever going to let you keep my granddaughter?" Richard asked, shaking his head in mock pity. "You are even more naive than I thought. You do not negotiate with a King, Claire. You simply surrender to him. I never had any intention of honoring that pathetic little custody deal. We are taking Sarah completely." He stepped closer to me, his eyes gleaming with absolute malice. "First thing Monday morning, my legal team is filing the emergency modification in family court. We are submitting the complete documented history of your deeply disturbed internet searches. We are submitting the sworn signed affidavit from the psychiatric specialist, confirming your total mental collapse. My personal friend on the bench will sign the order before noon." I stared at him, letting my eyes widen just a fraction to mimic rising panic. "You promised," I whispered, keeping my voice intentionally fragile. "You took my grandfather's land." "I took your land because you were foolish enough to give it to me," Richard sneered. "And now I am taking Sarah because she belongs exclusively to us. Your sacrifice was completely for nothing, Claire. You gave up your entire inheritance, and you are still going to lose your daughter. You have absolutely nothing left to bargain with. You have no money, no leverage, and no sanity left on paper. You are completely and utterly finished." He stepped back, crossing his arms, waiting for the inevitable emotional breakdown. He expected me to fall to my knees. He expected me to scream, to cry, to beg for mercy in the soundproof room. Nathan and Audrey watched me, eagerly thirsty for the emotional collapse they had worked so incredibly hard to engineer. They wanted to watch me shatter. The soundproof VIP lounge was so completely silent you could hear the ice shifting and cracking inside Richard's crystal Scotch glass. The three of them stood there utterly still, watching me with predatory anticipation. They were waiting for the collapse. They were waiting for me to fall to my knees, to beg for mercy, to bargain for scraps of time with my own child. They wanted a theatrical display of a broken woman submitting to their immense power. I gave them absolute chilling stillness. I did not shed a single tear. I did not let my voice tremble. I did not plead. I simply looked at Richard, letting my eyes drop the manufactured panic I had been carrying for weeks. The heavy leather briefcase was resting against my right leg. I lifted it and placed it directly in the center of the polished mahogany coffee table, pushing aside an expensive silver cigar box to make room. The harsh, metallic sound of the brass zipper tearing open was the only noise in the room. I reached inside and pulled out the massive 3-inch thick leather binder I had assembled. I let it drop onto the wood. It landed with a dull, heavy thud that seemed to echo in the small space. I opened the heavy cover and flipped to the first neatly labeled tab. I pulled out a crisp, freshly printed document and slid it across the smooth table until it stopped right in front of Richard's drink. He looked down at it, his brow furrowing in deep annoyance, which quickly morphed into profound confusion. "That is the original notarized Federal Environmental Protection Agency conservation easement for the 40 acres of land you just forced me to sign over to you," I explained. I used the exact same clinical detached tone I use when presenting evidence of embezzlement to a corporate board of directors. "My grandfather placed that ironclad federal protection on the property 30 years ago. The land you extorted from me is permanently designated as a protected wetland sanctuary. It cannot be paved. It cannot be developed. It cannot even be cleared of brush without triggering an immediate federal response." Richard stared at the paper. The smug, victorious smirk literally melted off his face, replaced by a slack-jawed expression of dawning horror. I kept my voice perfectly level, driving the facts home like nails into wood. I saw the commercial bridge loan applications you pushed through this week, Richard. I know you pledged that restricted commercially useless land as pristine commercial collateral to 3 separate out-of-state national banks. You explicitly signed sworn statements claiming the asset was unencumbered. By doing so, you have committed massive documented federal bank fraud. He gripped the edge of the mahogany table. He looked like a man who had just stepped off a cliff and was finally realizing there was no ground beneath him. Tomorrow morning, I continued my words, stripping the remaining oxygen from the room. When those national banks are notified that their multi-million-dollar collateral is commercially worthless and heavily restricted by the federal government, those massive bridge loans will instantly become callable. Your creditors will freeze your operating accounts. The EPA will hit your holding company with millions in environmental fines just for attempting the transaction. Your new corporate headquarters is an illegal fiction. Your real estate empire is completely and effectively bankrupt as of tomorrow morning. Richard was completely speechless. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The blood had entirely drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly pale gray. But I was not even close to finished. I turned my attention away from the ruined patriarch and looked directly at his son. Nathan's arrogant posture had completely vanished. He was staring at his father in blind panic. I flipped to the second tab in the heavy binder. I pulled out a thick stack of paper and slid it across the table toward him. These are the complete decrypted network protocol logs and timestamps from the night you broke into my house and planted the fake internet searches on my router, I said softly. And behind those are the access logs from Wednesday night. I tracked your static IP address directly to this executive office building as you attempted to drain my fabricated offshore bank account. Nathan stared at the long columns of printed digital code. His breathing became rapid and shallow. By trying to illegally access a banking portal and authorize a massive wire transfer using stolen credentials, you committed federal wire fraud, I informed him. Each click of your mouse, each attempt to bypass the security wall is a perfectly documented felony. The digital footprint leads right back to your personal corporate laptop. I did not wait for him to speak. I turned to Audrey. She was frozen in her liquid silver dress, her eyes wide with terror. I flipped to the third tab and pulled out 3 high-resolution full-color photographs printed on glossy paper. I handed them directly to her. They clearly showed her standing in my home office, holding her phone, actively taking pictures of my private bank statements. The time and date stamps were burned into the bottom corner of every single image. Audrey looked physically ill. She dropped the photographs onto the table as if they were literally on fire. Nathan finally found his voice. His hands were shaking violently as he pointed at the binder. "You cannot prove any of this," he stammered, his voice rising in an ugly, desperate panic. "We will destroy these papers right now. We will burn this binder. It is your word against ours, Claire. You are just a crazy ex-wife. No one will believe you." I offered him a genuine, completely relaxed smile. It was the first real smile I had worn in their presence in over a year. "I do not need anyone to believe me, Nathan," I said calmly. "I just need them to read the documentation. And you are welcome to destroy that binder. It is just a courtesy copy." I watched the realization hit them. I watched the last shred of their arrogant confidence completely shatter into dust. I softly informed them that my next-door neighbor Harrison was not just a friendly old man. He was a retired federal appellate judge. I told them that Harrison had already driven to the city. I explained that he had hand-delivered the original encrypted hard drives and the master binder directly to a former colleague who currently served as the lead prosecutor for the United States Attorney's Office. I made sure to mention that the package also included the flawless financial receipts, proving Richard had paid $45,000 to a disgraced physician for explicit medical perjury. "There is going to be no family court battle on Monday morning," I stated, my voice echoing in the absolute silence of the VIP room. "There are only going to be federal indictments. You tried to take my daughter. You tried to destroy my sanity. You tried to drain my livelihood. And in return, I let you meticulously wrap a federal prison sentence around your own necks." I did not wait for their response. I simply zipped up my empty leather briefcase. As I turned my back on them and walked toward the door, the absolute suffocating silence of the room finally shattered into a chaotic, panicked symphony of hushed screams. Richard was grabbing his chest, yelling furiously at Nathan for being so sloppy. Nathan was shouting back, his voice cracking with sheer terror. Audrey was crying hysterically, clutching the glossy photographs and begging her father to fix it. I unlocked the heavy oak door and stepped back out into the glittering, noisy charity gala. I walked right past the billionaires discussing their stock options. I walked past the local politicians holding their champagne flutes. I moved through the grand marble lobby and out the brass front doors into the crisp, clean night air. I handed my ticket to the valet. I got into my modest sedan. I turned the heater on, pulled out of the luxury hotel parking lot, and drove quietly home to my sleeping daughter. Fast forward 6 months. Richard's arrogant, sprawling corporate empire does not exist anymore. Federal regulators swooped in and dissolved his primary holding company within weeks of the EPA and bank fraud revelations coming to light. The massive out-of-state banks called in their loans exactly as I predicted, triggering a catastrophic financial collapse that wiped out their entire family fortune. Richard is currently under federal house arrest, facing a mountain of litigation that will consume the rest of his natural life. Nathan is currently awaiting sentencing in a federal district court. He is facing mandatory prison time for multiple counts of wire fraud, cyber intrusion, and conspiracy. The forged psychiatric evaluation vanished entirely, buried under the overwhelming weight of the medical perjury charges. I retain full, undisputed, and permanent legal custody of Sarah. They thought they were the smartest, most untouchable people in the room. They were entirely wrong. Toxic people will always mistake your silence for weakness. They operate on the fundamental assumption that because you are not screaming, because you are not throwing a public tantrum, you are simply not fighting back. They mistake your boundaries for submission. But the absolute best way to destroy a monster is to never, ever interrupt them while they are busy digging their own grave. Sometimes, the most powerful move you can make is to step completely aside. Remain perfectly calm and let them gorge themselves on a poisoned apple they picked with their own 2 hands. If you have ever had to outsmart the people who were supposed to protect you, let me know in the comments. Subscribe for more stories where the truth gets the final word. See you next time.